How to stop domestic violence. Support and healing. Introduction. Have you ever seen a lovely couple always laughing and cuddling whenever you visit them? Their social media is filled with happy pictures and videos of them dancing, singing, and enjoying good times. Everything looks perfect. You might see their posts and wish for a relationship like theirs, thinking, God, when will it be my turn? But what if they only show you what they want you to see? Behind closed doors, something else might be happening. What if one person in that family lives in constant fear? When we hear the words domestic violence, we often think of physical harm. While physical violence is possibly the most common type of abuse in a domestic environment, it is not the only kind. Many forms of domestic violence can occur, including physical, sexual, mental, and emotional abuse. These can happen in many ways and between different family members. It could be a man abusing his girlfriend or boyfriend, a son or daughter abusing their parent, guardian, uncle, aunt, grandparent, or sibling, a sibling abusing their brother or sister, or someone abusing their disabled family member or partner. It could also be a parent abusing a child, which is often classified as child abuse. However, in situations of domestic violence, children are frequently present and affected or abuse themselves. The two usually go hand in hand. Domestic and family violence can be hard to notice, and many cases aren't reported to doctors or the police. Since it's so common, all healthcare professionals like psychologists, nurses, pharmacists, dentists, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, and doctors will likely meet and need to help someone affected by it. Domestic violence means hurting someone close to you. This could be a spouse, a family member, or someone you live with. It can include things like verbal insults, physical abuse, controlling money, threats, and more. This book is here to help you understand domestic violence, its causes, and how it can affect your mental and emotional health. Whether you're going through it yourself or you're worried about someone you love, this book is for you. It's heartbreaking how millions of people around the world, regardless of their race, age, or where they live, are victimized. Some are able to speak out about what they've gone through, while others remain silent and even lose their lives. In these pages, you'll learn to recognize the red flags in any abusive partner or individual. You'll find guidance on how to get out of an abusive relationship and rebuild your life free from violence and abuse. Chapter 1. Understanding domestic violence. It isn't fun. Walking on eggshells all the time, losing all dignity and self-respect, and not being able to think clearly enough to find a way out. You're too scared to leave because you think there's nowhere to go. You don't want others to know about your situation because you're afraid they'll think less of you. Even if you manage to leave the relationship, domestic abuse leaves deep scars that take time to heal. Because of what you've learned from the abuse, you're always on the defensive. You're not emotionally stable enough to love yourself, which can make you fall back into unhealthy relationships. It's an endless cycle, but for some, there's light at the end of the tunnel. My mother is physically and mentally abusive to me. She tells me that my friends despise me, that no one wants to be around me, that I'm a burden, that I shouldn't eat because I'm fat, I weigh less than 100 pounds, that I'm useless, worthless, that I'll amount to nothing, that I was a mistake, and so on. Physically, she hits and slaps me frequently, sometimes unexpectedly. Recently, she has started coming into my room at night to do it, making it nearly impossible for me to sleep. So, how does it affect me? I'm extremely jumpy. I jerk when people move their hands quickly, when they move towards me in any way, when a door opens, when my friend sitting next to me reaches up to fix his hair, I cringe, and according to a few friends, I get this startled deer look, and proceed to stare at whatever moved until someone snaps me out of it or I snap out of it. Anxiety. I'm always worried that when people move, they'll hurt me. My friend says that he has danger signs that he looks for to indicate that I'm either A, becoming overstimulated and needing to leave the room, B, about to have an anxiety attack, or C, more than usual nervous and unsteady. When the third option occurs, it's usually because I had an injury the previous evening. He takes extra care to comfort me, such as by hugging me or giving me a gentle back rub until my mind returns from the state of anxiety. When I freak out, my friends also help me come back to reality by trying to get my attention, get me to stop staring at the thing that's making me jittery, look them in the eyes and take a deep breath with them. Self-worth. At the very bottom of the barrel, basically. Problems with trust. I hardly ever trust anyone. Sleeplessness. Unbelievably persistent and bothersome. Victims of domestic violence often feel trapped, struggle with low self-esteem, and doubt themselves. It's crucial to understand the different types of domestic abuse so victims can recognize what's happening and find ways to stay safe. When you think of domestic violence, we usually picture someone physically hurting their partner. But physical abuse is just one aspect. Abusers can control their victims through many other forms of abuse, such as physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, psychological abuse, abuse through technology. Though it may be easier to see, physical abuse continues to be a serious form of domestic violence. The visible scars and fractured bones are not the only things concerned. Pushing and even using weapons to inflict harm are examples of physical abuse. In reality, power is the driving force behind this type of abuse. Your abuser aims to instill a sense of helplessness and fear in you, as if there is no way out. Although it can be simple to start thinking that you deserve being ill-treated or that you'll always be in this situation, those beliefs are simply wrong. It's important to take serious action if you observe signs of physical abuse in yourself or a loved one, such as unexplained injuries or flinching at sudden movements. When you're experiencing emotional abuse, its goal is to erode your sense of self-worth. It often manifests through name-calling, insults, humiliation, and relentless criticism. In many instances of relationship violence, emotional abuse is a constant companion. It can be hard to grasp just how damaging emotional abuse is compared to physical violence, especially since it might seem like a normal part of toxic relationships at first. In most states, emotional abuse alone isn't enough to support criminal charges for domestic violence. Usually, you'll need to present evidence of physical violence alongside the emotional abuse. However, emotional abuse can help reveal the underlying motives behind the abuser's actions. Unfortunately, it can also be the reason you might choose not to press charges or pursue legal action against your abuser. Among the different kinds of domestic abuse you might experience is sexual abuse. It goes beyond the more visible crimes like sexual assault and rape. Sexual abuse includes even unwanted groping and degrading behavior, as well as other forms of sexual harassment. You might not know, but situations in which your partner uses drugs or alcohol to force you into sexual conduct can also qualify as sexual abuse. Also, you should be aware that the majority of experts consider it sexual abuse when someone forces you into not getting an abortion or using contraception. Reproductive coercion is the term used to describe this type of control over your reproductive choices. Not all forms of sexual abuse are considered crimes under the law. That's why it's important for you, as a victim, to study the applicable state criminal laws when dealing with a sexual assault incident. You need to make sure that the specific behavior in question is prohibited under your state's laws. Fortunately, rape, unwelcome sexual contact, and sexual assault are classified as crimes in most states today. If the victim is a minor or if there's a particular relationship between the victim and the perpetrator, such as being a parent, step-parent, teacher, coach, pastor, or counselor, penalties for the offense are often more severe. Additionally, some states have laws requiring offenders who have STIs like HIV to disclose their status to their partners before engaging in sexual activity. Do you know you can experience domestic violence when you are left in a position where you are completely financially dependent on your partner? Your partner might prevent you from getting an education or a job outside the home. You also experience abuse when your partner might refuse to provide for essential needs like clothing, food, and other necessities. The worst part of this form of abuse is where you and your partner have pooled your money into joint accounts, but your partner controls all the funds, leaving you with nothing. In all the types of domestic violence, financial or economic abuse may be the least obvious to the outside observer. Although it is often less discussed, financial abuse is just as serious as emotional or physical abuse in the context of domestic abuse. Many states' laws are now starting to recognize that financial abuse can be a serious problem. When you're married, the risk of financial misconduct is even greater. Since most debts and credit are shared, one spouse could easily engage in questionable financial practices that affect both partners. Whether it's running up debt on joint credit cards or hiding assets, the consequences can be severe for both people. For those who aren't married or haven't combined their finances, There might be more options for legal action, like credit card fraud or theft. But no matter the situation, financial abuse can have serious legal and personal repercussions. The phrase psychological abuse refers to any behavior that instills fear or intimidation. It is essential to note and be consistent in this conduct, and you might not be buoyant enough to file a domestic abuse lawsuit in court for a single incident. Similar to emotional abuse, psychological abuse might not be enough in and of itself to warrant filing a domestic violence report unless it is exceptionally severe. Under the general category of psychological abuse, a wide range of behaviors are included, keeping you from speaking to others until you have permission. These means keeping you from being able to leave your house, threatening to use force against you, emotional extortion for defying the abuse of your wishes, and threatening or hurting your personal belongings or pets. Your local jurisdiction determines whether psychological abuse will be prosecuted as a crime. Have you been abused through the internet, such as social media, text messages, and phone calls? If you have, you will notice how bad you feel after the comments has been written or after the phone calls. The advancement of technology in the internet age has also created new opportunities for domestic abusers to commit domestic violence. This could include unwelcome, persistent, and profane text messages, phone calls, and posts on numerous websites. An offender may use technology to track or record you, such as cameras and video equipment or monitoring devices on your car or personal items. Chapter 2. Myth and Signs of Domestic Violence. Domestic abuse has an impact on you individually, as well as on your family and the larger community. You might struggle to find or keep a job, or have difficulty finding housing. Behavioral problems can become more common in children who witness domestic abuse. Unfortunately, in places with high rates of this kind of abuse, crime rates are often higher than usual. You can evaluate the efficacy of present legislation, interventions, and support systems by looking at domestic violence data. It assists in advocacy activities by you giving legislators, groups, and individuals devoted to preventing and eradicating domestic abuse access to information based on empirical research. Also, it helps you to track development, assess actions results, and formulate action plans with accurate and current statistics. Do you know in U.S., there are more than 12 million women and men are victims of rape, stalking, or physical abuse by intimate partners each year. It is shocking to learn that these horrible crimes claim the lives of 20 individuals on average every minute. In the U.S., 10% of males and 29% of women have experienced physical abuse, stalking, or rape by a partner, which has negatively affected their ability to go about their everyday lives. About 4% of males and 15% of women in the U.S. have been harmed by intimate relationship violence, which includes rape, physical abuse, and stalking. In the U.S., 1 in 4 women, 24.3%, and 1 in 7 males, 13.8%, who are 18 years of age or older report having experienced severe physical abuse from a partner at some point in their life. In the U.S., 1 in 4 males, 28.5%, and more than 1 in 3 women, 35.6%, had experienced physical violence, stalking, or rape at some point in their relationships. 48.4% of women and 48.8% of men in the U.S. report having experienced psychological aggression from an intimate partner at some point in their lives. The age group of 18 to 34 is typically the most affected by intimate partner violence in women. 77% of women who experience intimate partner violence are between the ages of 18 and 24, 76% are between the ages of 25 and 34, and 81% are between the ages of 35 and 49. These women had experienced similar abuse from the same perpetrator in the past. Myth: only families with low incomes experience domestic violence. Fact: domestic violence affects families of all sizes, in all regions of the nation, in all age groups, and in all socioeconomic classes. It also occurs in urban, suburban, and rural settings. Myth: drugs and alcohol are to blame for domestic abuse. Fact: substance abuse is not the cause of domestic violence. Domestic abuse is a decision. To justify your behavior, you might make sure you always have drugs or alcohol on hand. You might also claim that you couldn't have alcohol or drugs, which is why you did what you did. Myth: anger management problems are the cause of domestic violence. Fact. Anger is not a factor in domestic violence. You use anger as a tool to achieve your goals. We understand you are very much in control because you might prevent the phone from ringing or the door from opening. You might aim punches and kicks at areas of the body where bruises are less likely to show. And you don't abuse everyone who irritates you. Instead, you wait until there are no witnesses before abusing the person you claim to love. Myth. Abusers and victims don't think well of themselves. Fact. The abuser who abuse you do not lack self-worth. They feel they have a right to dominance and control over you as their spouse. Fact. Although you as a victim of abuse may have started with high self-esteem, the abuser uses emotional abuse, such as calling you names, putting you down, or telling you it's all their fault, to undermine your self-worth. Because they think you will place more of the blame on them and be less inclined to report their actions, some abusers specifically target those who have low self-esteem. You as a victim with high self-esteem are more likely to pose a longer-term control challenge to other abusers. Myth. In a relationship, domestic violence only occurs once or twice. Fact. Over time, abusers typically increase the frequency and intensity of their violent behaviors. Myth. Some individuals relish beatings. They request it. They are worthy of it. There must be a reason why some people abuse others repeatedly. Fact. No one is deserving of abuse. Not even you. It is everyone's right to live in a world without violence. Abuse by a partner is something that nobody wants. Upon discovering that their second or third partner is an abuser, survivors frequently face blame from others, believing that it must be something about them, or from themselves, believing that I always seem to pick abusers. The abuser employs the charm tactic early on in the relationship to discover your history of abuse. This information is used by the abuser to either silence you by saying, "You are not going to tell anyone because if you do, they will never believe you because you said that before," or to blame the victim for the violence. "See, it must be something that you are doing wrong, or there would not have been two of us." Myth. Kids don't realize there is violence in the house. Fact. Research indicates that the majority of kids are aware of the violence aimed at abused parents. For information on how to assist kids who witness domestic abuse, see Children's Issues. Myth. There is no chance of harm or injury to children. Fact. There is a higher likelihood of child abuse in homes where partners abuse their partners. Child abuse is most often predicted by domestic violence. Being a good parent does not include exposing kids to a world full of hate speech and violent acts. Myth. Kids who see violence will become violent adults. Fact. Research indicates that, for instance, 30% of male child witnesses decide to commit abuse themselves as adults. This shows that 70% of them are dedicated to breaking the cycle of violence in their lives and do not go on to become abusers. Most young people who witness domestic abuse grow up to be child advocates, determined to raise their own without resorting to violence and entering fields that aim to eradicate violence against children in general. Common signs of domestic violence. Sure, signs of domestic violence like physical injuries might be simple to spot. Others might be things you can easily brush off or explain away, like blaming a friend's absence from an activity you used to enjoy together on a simple case of boredom. Although the effects of domestic abuse vary from person to person, they all have physical and psychological effects. Often, your vulnerability to domestic abuse is signaled by several related symptoms. Anybody, regardless of social, educational, or financial standing, can become a victim of domestic abuse. Red flags are worth being aware of, even though they don't always indicate that someone is being mistreated in this manner. For a variety of reasons, many victims of abuse may attempt to hide what is happening to them. These people need assistance. Physical signs of domestic abuse. If someone is being physically abused, they probably have bruises or other physical injuries that are consistent with being kicked, smothered, or knocked down regularly, and their explanation for these injuries is probably not very convincing. Here are a few indicators of physical abuse. Dark eyes, bruises on the arms, swollen lips, purple or red spots on the neck, sprained wrists. It's also not uncommon for someone to use clothing to hide the visible symptoms. For instance, in the heat of the summer, you might see someone you care about wearing a scarf or long sleeves. Using sunglasses indoors or applying more makeup than usual are two more telltale indicators of domestic violence. In relationships, abuse happens when one partner tries to control and dominate the other. Physical abuse usually follows psychological or emotional abuse as the first form of control. Domestic violence is the term used when abuse takes the form of physical violence. Emotional signs of domestic abuse. Naturally, domestic abuse can have a profoundly negative emotional impact, leaving you feeling hopeless, helpless, or depressed. People who experience domestic abuse may come to believe that they are powerless to free themselves from the abuser. They might also show signs of being hypervigilant and never really able to unwind. Other emotional indicators of abuse consist of anxiety, agitation or persistent fear, alterations in sleeping patterns, either too little or too much, acquiring a drug or alcohol addiction incredibly contrite or meek, loss of enthusiasm for routine tasks, low regard for oneself, looking scared, depression symptoms, attempting or discussing suicide. Although many other conditions or factors could be causing these symptoms, they are common among victims of domestic abuse who feel they are trapped in the relationship. A person who was once friendly and happy may be quietly withdrawing from society, which could be an indication of domestic abuse. You might observe that the individual turns reticent and aloof, starts cutting off ties with friends and family in an attempt to isolate themselves, abruptly cancels meetings or appointments with you, quits goals they would usually find enjoyable, shows an excessive amount of privacy about their personal life or the person they are dating, frequently arrives late for work or other appointments. When they are away from the abuser, victims of abuse may appear tense, nervous, or excessively anxious in an attempt to appease their partner. If they have kids, they might act shy, scared, or incredibly well-behaved around their partner. Despite their reluctance to discuss the actual abuse, victims may characterize their abuser as moody or easily agitated. They might disclose that the spouse has an incredibly ill temper after consuming alcohol. If you have experienced abuse, you may occasionally feel so terrified that you are unable to act to protect yourself, or your children, or even to make decisions. When your anxiety reaches that degree, they will even decline offers of assistance from friends, relatives, or even trained professional services. The goal of domestic abuse is control, not violence. Someone may be experiencing abuse on some level if you observe that they appear to be highly controlled or manipulated in every aspect of their life. Here are some examples of control. 1. Asking for permission to go anywhere or to meet and socialize with other people. 2. Constant calls, texts, or tracking by their partner, wanting to know where they are, what they are doing, and who they are with. 3. Having very little money available to them, not having access to a credit card, or having to account for every penny spent. 4. I do not have access to a vehicle. 5. Referring to their partner as jealous or possessive, or always accusing them of having affairs. Chapter 3. The Cycle of Abuse. Have you been in an abusive relationship where you noticed a repetitive pattern of abuse? The cycle of abuse consists of 4 stages: tension building, incident, reconciliation, and calm. This period of quiet and reconciliation can build false hope and emotional dependency in you. This cyclical pattern can trap you and make it difficult for you to get out of the abusive relationship. The cycle of abuse is tension building, incident, and reconciliation. In the tension building stage, your relationship begins to feel strained and stressed. The abuser might get moodier, more easily agitated, and more easily irritated with you. In an attempt to avoid any triggers that might elicit an attack from the abuser, you might feel as though they are treading carefully. There might be slight assaults, verbal abuse, or other types of psychological suffering. This will build tension and make you feel anxiety and dread of what will happen next. The incident stage is the point at which the abuse becomes obvious. Sexual, emotional, or physical abuse is possible. You may suffer injuries as a result of the abuser's angry outburst. This phase is distinguished by unpredictable and explosive conduct. The incident may involve severe physical violence, threats, or verbal abuse. It may also cause serious bodily harm or psychological trauma. The abuser usually experiences guilt or fear of losing you after the abusive incident in the reconciliation stage. They might express regret, offer justifications, or downplay the abuse's seriousness. They may also offer you gifts, affection, and assurances of improvement on you. The perpetrator of abuse may apologize to you and ask for pardon, frequently promising that it won't occur again. You might be willing to forgive and make amends due to the hopes for a change, and wants to trust the abuser's words. The calm stage is where your relationship seems to be returning to normal. This phase is also called the honeymoon phase. You will feel relieved and hopeful that the abuse has stopped, even if the abuser continues to act lovingly and attentively. Depending on how long the underlying problems are left unsolved, this phase of calm and stability may end or continue for a while before the tension-building stage recurs. It is often noticed that it is only in romantic relationships that manipulation is discussed the most. It's essential to keep in mind that emotional manipulation and abuse can occur in any relationship. This includes controlling or narcissistic in-laws, bosses, roommates, neighbors, friends, or partners, as well as abusive or toxic parents, i.e., a poisonous mother or narcissistic parent. Even though it's unlikely that you will encounter emotional manipulation in each of these situations, it's still helpful to recognize the warning signs and know how to react. An emotional abuser uses specific methods to attack you, known as manipulation tactics. Through the destruction of your self-worth and the development of a strong bond with the abuser that makes ending the relationship challenging, these strategies are used to bring you down as an individual. In addition to common strategies like gaslighting and attempting to exert control over you, abusers can use several tactics to abuse you. No one should be manipulated by family members, spouses, or friends. A therapist can teach you to protect yourself from manipulation and build healthier relationships. One way to take advantage of, control, or influence you for one's benefit is through manipulating you emotionally. To achieve their desired outcome, manipulators target and control their emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. A pattern of manipulation techniques is a sign of abuse, even though manipulative behavior can occur in everyday situations. A severe mental illness, such as narcissistic or antisocial personality disorder, may be the abuser's traits. Signs you're being manipulated. Being able to convince you that something is wrong is a skill many manipulators possess. Consider how an individual makes you feel after a conversation if you believe you are being manipulated. The manipulation gives the manipulator a feeling of authority and control. They also make sure the manipulator's needs are satisfied. A relationship that consistently employs manipulation techniques is, at the very least, toxic, but it may also be an indication of psychological or emotional abuse. 1. Gaslighting. Gaslighting aims to make you doubt everything about yourself, including your identity, your memory, your sense of sanity, your feelings, and your trust in yourself. This usually shows as the abuser labeling you as mad or manipulating events to cause you to doubt yourself. This is how a manipulator gets you to eventually trust them and follow their instructions without question, thus giving them total control. 2. Projection. People who project their emotions, traits, or desires onto others use projection as a psychological defense mechanism. When the victim offers substitute activities or urges them to take care of themselves, the manipulator may respond with something like, "You're so controlling." The manipulator projects their desires and feelings onto the other person to prevent feeling or looking that way. 3. Controlling your life. All forms of manipulation aim to give you more control, but as well as influencing your thoughts, feelings, and actions, a manipulator can also mold the course of your life and everyday routine. This can involve limiting who can access your finances, financial abuse, keeping you from pursuing higher education, or even dictating which friends you can and cannot hang out with. Making you feel as though you can't function or make decisions without them is the aim of a manipulator trying to take over your everyday activities. 4. Name-calling. A manipulator frequently uses derogatory language when describing your characteristics or actions. This intends to subtly persuade you that you are unworthy of better treatment and to make you feel inferior. You usually become more accustomed to the name-calling, which often begins in milder, less offensive ways and increases in frequency and intensity. 5. Generalizations. When characteristics of one individual are applied to a whole group of people within the same demographic, this is known as a generalization. A manipulative person might use the statement, "All women are more focused on themselves than on their partners," as an example. This incentivizes you to behave or show yourself in the most agreeable or manageable way for the manipulator. 6. Love bombing. When someone puts excessive amounts of time, energy, affection, and strong feelings into another person, it's known as love bombing. This can involve giving presents, expressing admiration in great detail, and sacrificing all of one's time and attention to appease the you. A manipulator will use love bombing to establish closeness and confidence quickly. A manipulator can increase your devotion by preying your innate need to feel valued and wanted. 7. The silent treatment. Although it's common for someone going through emotional overwhelm, also known as emotional flooding, to verbally and emotionally shut down, it can also be purposefully employed as a ploy for manipulation. As a kind of discipline, a manipulator will cut off lines of communication and connection. This can involve avoiding closeness, communication in any way, and showing affection. 8. Playing on insecurities. Regretfully, emotional manipulators are very good at identifying and heightening a person's fears. An exploiter goes after your internalized sense of shame or inferiority complex. As shame is an unpleasant emotion that most people instinctively strive to suppress, allowing the manipulator to incite it makes you more likely to comply to keep you from experiencing it again. 9. Using guilt trips. Guilt trips are standard tactic manipulators used to change their target's emotions. This might sound like this: I'm going to feel lonely and depressed if you decide to go out with your friends tonight. In the long run, the manipulator wants you to believe that doing that action without first consulting them will prevent you from doing it again. 10. Passive aggressiveness. It is known as passive-aggressive communication when someone says or gestures without expressing what they mean. This can be in the form of backhanded compliments, pouting, or sarcasm, among other things. Because of this, you are forced to constantly observe, speculate, and attempt to predict or adapt to the manipulator's emotions and reactions. This eventually prevents you from having the time or attention to consider your feelings in the relationship because it keeps the focus and power on the manipulator. Understanding trauma bonding on victims. Do you know trauma bonding is caused by the abuse cycle? Abusers are sometimes kind and loving the honeymoon phase before resuming abusive behavior, resulting in a confusing and unpredictable situation. The abuser's unpredictable kindness gives you hope that things will get better, which keeps you attached to the abuser. Trauma bonding is similar to Stockholm Syndrome, in which hostages develop bonds with their captors. Trauma bonding is a strong emotional connection that develops between you, the victim, and their abuser, making it very hard for the you to leave. There are psychological and emotional effects involved in trauma bonding. As a victim, you might experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Because of the recurrent and unpredictable nature of the abuse, you may experience flashbacks, feel on edge all the time, and find it difficult to control your emotions. Living in an abusive environment can cause ongoing stress, which can increase depression and anxiety symptoms in you. You might also feel hopeless, helpless, and worthless, as these are common feelings among victims. As a victim, you may minimize or deny the abuse and place the blame on yourself, which distorts your perception of reality and impairs your ability to see the circumstances as they are. As a coping mechanism for the emotional pain, you might dissociate from your thoughts, feelings, and environment. The abuse you experience may reduce your self-esteem, making you feel unlovable and questioning your own decisions. As a victim, you usually live in fear of your abusers, and most times, you are deeply ashamed of the abuse. You may feel confused and unsure on how to respond when your abuser alternates between kindness and cruelty. Abusers always isolate you from your friends and family, making you feel lonely and dependent. Chapter 4. The Abuser's Profile. If you are a victim of domestic abuse, you may be wondering why your abuser behaved in the manner that they did. You might think that understanding the abuse risk factors will help you understand the actions of your abuser. There are many different types of domestic violence, such as financial, technological, emotional, sexual, physical, and psychological abuse. As a victim, you may choose to attack your spouse, a practice known as intimate partner violence, as well as your kids, parents, siblings, and other family members. In the U.S., domestic violence affects about 10 million people annually. Even though some things can make someone more likely to abuse others, this doesn't mean that they shouldn't be held responsible for their actions. Their conduct is their responsibility. As a victim of the abuse or violation, you bear no part of the blame. Domestic abuse is an acquired habit. Put differently, individuals acquire violent tendencies from the homes, communities, and society that they are surrounded by. People may emulate violent behavior when they see it. An abuser usually downplays or denies the level of the violence, as well as its impact on you and other family members. An abuser views you as their property or as something to be sexualized, objectifying them. An abuser has low self-worth and a sense of helplessness and futility in the world. Even though they might come across as successful, on the inside they are insecure. The reasons behind an abuser's actions are externalized. They attribute their violent behavior to external factors like stress, their partner's actions, having a bad day, alcoholism, drug use, or other variables. An abuser is often viewed as a nice person by those who are not in the relationship, and they may be friendly and charming in between violent moments. The abuser can be anyone. All social classes, ethnicities, religions, and backgrounds are represented. They could be your spouse, your child's teacher, your neighbor, your pastor, your friend, a relative, or a coworker. Remarkably, most abusers only use violence against their intimate partners, either living or deceased. 90% of abusers do not have a criminal record, according to a study, and they usually adhere to the law when they are not mistreated. What traits do abusers have in common? One thing that all abusers have in common is that they struggle terribly to respect the boundaries set by others. An actual abuser will repeatedly laugh at or disregard your requests to say no or to go away until they burn out. Often they don't even realize that their cruel actions are abuse. Instead, they see it as usual, self-assured, and the only thing to do, even when. Some traits of an abuser may include a deep intuition that something is wrong, acting quickly and strongly. They are incredibly endearing, appearing too excellent to be accurate, treating people and animals unfairly or unkindly, sensing that you're being taken advantage of, controlled, or mistreated. They abuse in a cycle that consists of the honeymoon period, building conflict, and ongoing misconduct. They put you under pressure. They speak harshly. They become angry quickly, especially over small matters in their presence or proximity. You experience fear, guilt, or confusion, the fear-obligation-guilt fog, and physically you feel exhausted, queasy, or nervous. What causes domestic violence? There could be a time when you might wonder what might have caused the domestic violence you had experienced. Domestic can be varied and individual, and there is no one cause of domestic violence. While the possible causes of domestic violence may be as complex as some of the warning signs, research shows that much of domestic violence behavior is learned. You know that children who witness domestic abuse may grow up thinking physical or psychological violence is an acceptable way to solve conflict. In the same way, raising children to believe a different gender is inferior may result in exhibiting controlling behavior later in life. The need for control that could lead to domestic violence may be linked to several individual factors, including a less access to education, personality disorders, substance use, cultural attitudes, gender ideologies, low self-esteem, a struggling with anger management, insecurity, anger management issues, a believing they have the right to control their partner, feelings of inferiority, jealousy. However, having some of these traits doesn't automatically mean someone will have an unmet need for control that develops into domestic violence. Even when you have a partner who is insecure or experiences low self-esteem, doesn't necessarily mean he or she will have tendencies for abuse. Power and control. A partner's behavior pattern intended to obtain or retain control and power over another partner distinguishes domestic violence from other forms of violence. These behavioral tactics usually get used by abusers to maintain their partner in the relationship. Abuse typically begins slowly and subtly, and can eventually become persistent. These subtle behaviors result in physical, sexual, or psychological violence when it comes to domestic abuse. Subtle behaviors such as financial or emotional abuse may be used to encourage violence, even after domestic abuse reaches a higher level by further subduing the abused partner and making them easier to control. Your partner may be engaging in heated-up domestic violence if you observe that their actions are more directed toward dominating or controlling you. Low self-esteem. Not everyone who has low self-esteem goes on to become abusive, even though traits like this can contribute to an abuser's need for control. It also does not absolve them of responsibility for their deeds. Mental health conditions. A lot of abusers tend to attribute their actions to outside forces. They might argue that they turned abusive because of their victim. Some people may attribute their actions to their drug abuse, mental illness, or upbringing. However, violent or abusive behavior is not caused by mental health conditions. The American Psychological Association (APA) points out that very few persons with severe mental illnesses go on to commit violent crimes, and those who do may do so as a result of the same circumstances that can contribute to mental illness, such as child abuse. Despite its challenges, mental illness is not a justification for harming other people. Similarly, substance abuse disorder, another mental health issue, does not lead to violence. However, according to the APA, those who use drugs and alcohol simultaneously may be more likely to act violently. Even though some people may choose to behave more violently when they are drunk, this is still a choice. Childhood trauma. Many of the people who commit acts of domestic violence were either abused as children themselves or were raised in abusive homes. They might be raised to think that using violence to resolve disputes is acceptable. An intergenerational cycle of abuse may result from this, in which some victims of abuse go on to abuse others. However, a lot of people who experience abuse as kids go on not to abuse others. Emphasizing that childhood abuse is not an excuse for domestic violence is essential, even though it may have influenced the abuser's worldview. Systemic or structural inequities. People are more likely to abuse others if they have a low income level, have a low education level, experience economic stress, such as being unemployed. A domestic abuse is more widespread in communities with high rates of poverty, low levels of educational opportunities, high unemployment rates, high rates of violence and crime, low levels of community involvement, easy access to drugs and alcohol, weak community efforts against abuse, for example, when neighbors are unwilling to intervene when they witness violence. Notwithstanding this, it's important to remember that abusive individuals can come from any neighborhood, culture, or socioeconomic class. The terminology used to present statistics and other data points is rather binary, alternating between the terms male and female or men and women, as you'll notice. This kind of language is usually avoided, but when reporting on research subjects and clinical results, it is essential to be specific. Abusive behavior usually begins slowly and progresses over time. It could start with nasty comments or forceful actions. This may result in more frequent and severe verbal abuse, which would leave the victim feeling terrified and uneasy all the time. The abuser may eventually resort to physical violence. It could start small, like pushing or slapping, but it may rise fast to include beating, strangling, or the use of weapons. The abuser may apologize and make amends after an abusive experience. They might be incredibly kind for a while, giving you hope that things will improve. But this is often a phase in the cycle, and the abuse usually resumes, often in harsher form than before. As a victim, you may also be isolated from friends and family, or have your finances controlled in an attempt to subjugate you. Threats may be used to maintain your fear and compliance. By being aware of this pattern, you can spot the warning signals of escalated abuse and act to stop it before it gets much worse. Chapter 5. Effects on Children. You sometimes watch how a child acts with his playmates, and you'll be surprised at where they learnt it from. When they bully their friends to take what doesn't belong to them, use vulgar words to arouse tears, or some go the extra miles to putting sharp objects such as needles or nails just to make their playmates feel hurt. The truth is, the results for children who see domestic violence from parents are never good. For a male child, he discovers that women are things that he can treat badly and with contempt. Seldom will he understand that this is not appropriate behavior. He'll keep the abuse cycle going. Even if he concludes that hitting is wrong, he won't understand that other forms of abuse are equally damaging, nor will he give a damn that women are sentient beings with feelings. The effect on the female is that the girl will realize that women are nothing more than excrement or punching bags. Because she won't know that men are expected to treat women with honor and respect, she will be in unhealthy relationships. She'll let her kids see her in action. She will never know what a peaceful home can be like, because those kinds of homes make her uncomfortable. Whether the abuse is being carried out by the mother against the father or vice versa, the consequences on children of domestic abuse are devastating. In the brain, trauma causes a significant release of cortisol. This prepares the child for a lifetime of emotional and health issues, even as adults. More often than not, children who witness abuse go on to either commit abuse themselves or become victims of abuse. In school, the traumatized kids struggle to concentrate. Introducing children to violence is a form of abuse. Growing up, I experienced domestic violence in my family. Being witness to violence led me to feel depressive and down. Not only did I feel guilty for not being able to save my mom from the abuse, but I also felt trapped. I would instead let my mom leave the marriage rather than stay in the unhealthy situation she was in. Hearing the slamming of pans and seeing her weak body hurt me tremendously. I grew into a quiet child, a person who remained voiceless and could not stand up to her bullying peers. Fortunately, my mom got the help she needed and ended her marriage. I am much healthier and happier than ever before. Children experiencing abuse are getting the message from their fathers that it is okay to abuse mothers. It is the way you get what you want. Is it okay to pick on people smaller than you? Women are usually smaller than. It is the best way to rule your household. It is better than using love and communication. It is something to take seriously because you may be the next one to be abused. If you have experienced abuse that is frequent and continued at home, you may grow up to be emotionally abnormal and chaotic. You might find it challenging to set limits with others because you were never taught how to set emotional or physical boundaries properly. Because you may have learned to freeze or run from situations like seeing a parent abused, you may find it difficult to accept who you are. As a result, you may self-isolate or self-negate. Children who witness domestic violence may have specific social behavioral problems because of their home environments. Some children may be more likely to express their internalized anger through fighting, lying, cheating on tests, and bullying, while others may use silence and the fawn response as a coping mechanism. Children who witness abuse at home may appear numb to it if they remain silent about it. To ensure their survival, they might also decide to pander to others. Children can pick up harmful behaviors from their primary caregivers, whether it's accepting abuse or engaging in it themselves. These children could find it difficult to stand up for themselves healthily when others try to bully or press them. In situations like these, a child from a stable and safe home may seek out the assistance of an adult and show a willingness to interact with more amiable peers, but a child from an abusive home may find it challenging to do so. Since the abuse was accepted at home, they might either put up a fight or choose to ignore it. Youths may also be more vulnerable to drug abuse and other harmful habits, as well as sexual assault victims, because they lack the skills to establish and monitor boundaries. Children in school can show antisocial behaviors and feel guilty for not being able to repair the bond between their primary caregivers. The notion that they are at fault may severely damage their self-esteem. Low marks in school and other adverse educational outcomes can also be caused by stressors at home and school, as well as a negative self-image. Moreover, anxiety and PTSD can result from seeing abuse at home. Numerous indicators point to this. Bedwetting, crying, and thumb-sucking are all possible reactions in young kids who witness abuse. These mental health problems can also have physical effects on children. There may be headaches and stomach aches. Fever and colds can result from a compromised immune system, which is another effect of stress. In addition, kids might tend to use food as a coping method. Poor diets and binge eating disorders are prevalent in children who witness domestic violence. Later on, this may result in diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. When you witness abuse as an adult, you often go through the same cycle again. As a traumatized child, you can grow up to be either the abused or the abusers. It is essential to recognize that staying in a situation of domestic violence to keep children in a two-parent home is not always a healthy decision, given the numerous adverse effects of witnessing domestic violence. But most times, you may see a woman who chooses to stay in these situations for various reasons, including emotional, social, financial, etc. Chapter 6. Support and Healing. Suppose you know of someone who has experienced family or domestic abuse. In that case, there's a good chance that one of your acquaintances, your mother, sister, friend, coworker, or neighbor has experienced domestic or family abuse. Maybe you think this problem will work itself out. Not at all. Unless steps are taken to put a stop to it, domestic and family violence usually doesn't end. However, knowing what to do can be challenging. People usually hesitate to talk about personal matters because they fear being watched. A few signs that someone you know might be impacted by family and domestic violence are as follows. They might be bruised or injured, or she might have a lot of incidents that she doesn't explain. She occasionally has to miss work due to these accidents. Activities, family finances, clothing choices, and relationships with friends and family are all controlled by one partner. The individual regularly postpones plans or acts, as though they are terrified of upsetting their partner. The partner publicly makes fun of the person, or you notice tension in their remarks. The spouse appears excessively focused, always sticks by their side, or is cautious about who they converse with. You observe changes in their behavior or that of their children. They seem worn out or scared. How you can help. Friends and family are often the first people that many women talk to about domestic abuse. To escape domestic abuse, one must have a lot of bravery, time, preparation, and assistance. Women should be aware that there are people who know the situation and care about helping them. 1. Listen without judging. Express your concern and willingness to listen to your friend. In a safe place, please pay close attention to what they say and listen to them with empathy. Accept them. Never underestimate their fear of danger or hold them responsible for what is happening. Tell them that no one should be mistreated, assaulted, or intimidated. 2. Allow your friend to make their own decisions. As you pay attention, try to understand everything keeping your friend from leaving. Usually it's very complex. Please give them the freedom to choose for themselves. He is controlling a great deal of her life if she is being abused. Don't stop helping them even if they go and come back. 3. Guide her to a specialist domestic violence support service. Many saved victims remember how a friend, neighbor, or physician offered them support or directed them to a support service. Tell them you are here to support them and that they are not alone. Reassure her that any information about her will remain private. Many people first consult with marriage counselors, psychiatrists, churches, and other professionals. Regretfully, not every professional in the helping field understands the intricacies of domestic abuse and the threats to her safety. Encourage her to get in touch with the domestic violence service if the first person she tries to help is not very helpful. 4. Help make a safety plan. Your friend might choose to stay in the abusive relationship or, after a bit of time off, return to the abuser. While you shouldn't force them to leave, let them know that you are worried about them and their kids and assist your friend in weighing the potential dangers of the violence. Encourage them to record their experiences in a diary if it is safe. Assist your friend in considering what actions they can take if the abusive partner recurs. Create a contact list for emergencies. In an emergency, advise her to stash away a suitcase filled with clothes, cash, bank books, birth certificates, and school records. Recognize that she might be in the greatest danger when she tries to flee. In an emergency, these records and personal belongings should be easily accessible. 5. Help find a safe place. Help your friend in getting in touch with the Juan Domestic Violence Service. The personnel can offer assistance in assessing options and locating a safe place. Act if you witness an assault in progress. Dial 000 to reach the police. Remember that nobody else has to do this. If you are assaulting someone in your car, blast your horn until someone else stops or the police arrive. As dangerous as these situations can be, take care to protect yourself at all times. But do move forward. Watch them at the absolute least. By communicating to the offender that you are observing them, you can stop them from using violence. Community action against domestic violence. 1. Educate yourself and others. As a community, we can help survivors of domestic abuse and work to stop violence before it starts by educating ourselves and others, supporting survivors, pushing for systemic change, creating safe spaces, and promoting respectful relationships. One effective weapon in the fight against domestic abuse is education. People can improve their ability to identify abuse and provide appropriate support by becoming more knowledgeable about the problem, including its causes, effects, and warning signs. 2. Organizing programs to share information, eliminate myths, and offer valuable data that can be shared across networks, Communities can organize workshops, seminars, and awareness campaigns. Supporting victims of domestic abuse is one of the most effective ways to stop it. Providing a safe environment for them to talk about their experiences, listening to them without passing judgment, or helping them locate expert assistance are some ways to do this. Local shelters frequently need organizations and volunteers in the area. One can genuinely improve the lives of individuals impacted by domestic abuse by giving their time or resources. 3. Advocate for change. To address domestic violence at a structural level, advocacy is essential. This could mean advocating for laws and policies that safeguard victims and hold offenders accountable. By getting in touch with their legislators, joining advocacy groups, and using social media to spread the word about domestic abuse issues, community members can push for change. Furthermore, assisting groups that offer survivors legal assistance can guarantee that they have access to justice. 4. Foster safe environments. It is crucial to establish secure and encouraging spaces where people feel comfortable revealing domestic abuse. Workplaces, educational institutions, and places of worship can all adopt survivor supporting policies, like providing flexible scheduling or resources for safety planning. Programs for education on constructive conflict resolution and healthy relationships can also help create a culture that is hostile to violence. 5. Encourage respectful relationships. Encouraging fair and respectful relationships begins with each person. Respect, consent, and equality can be modeled and imparted by parents, teachers, and community leaders. Talking about power dynamics, gender stereotypes, and emotional intelligence can help build stronger bonds between partners and eventually reduce domestic violence. Always keep in mind that awareness and action lead to change. Working together, we can create a future in which domestic violence doesn't cast a shadow over our neighborhoods. Healing from abuse and violence. Knowing that healing from the negative impacts of abuse is possible is crucial if you or someone you know has experienced abuse and violence. It is the right of abuse survivors to be treated with dignity and respect. They are entitled to a life free from abuse and one that is secure. Here are some steps a survivor can take to help heal from the effects of abuse. 1. Acknowledge that there has been abuse. 2. You don't have to take the abuse personally. 3. Accuse your abuser of the situation. 4. Abuse never comes from you. 5. Abuse is not justifiable. 6. Decide to move past the abuse and heal. 7. Give yourself a high priority when recovering. 8. Discuss the abuse with a reliable person. This could be a staff member at your neighborhood domestic abuse or independent living center, a close friend or family member, or a reputable medical professional. Conclusion: anybody can become a victim of domestic abuse, including you, regardless of his or her gender identity, sexual orientation, age, or race. People from all educational and socioeconomic backgrounds are impacted by domestic violence. Domestic violence affects intimate partners who are married, cohabitating, dating, or have children in common. It can also occur in same-sex and opposite-sex relationships. Even your family members, friends, co-workers, other witnesses, and the community at large can also be affected by domestic violence. One group of people who are severely affected by domestic violence are children who witness it as they grow up. When you have repeated experiences with violence in the home as a child, it increases your risk of becoming the next generation of abuse victims and abusers. This domestic violence teaches you that violence is a standard way of life and predisposing you to a host of physical and social problems. The goal of this book about domestic violence is to inform you about the dynamics of abuse in your intimate relationships, assist you in understanding what you're going through, and teach your friends and family how to spot warning signs of abuse in their loved ones' relationships. Thank you.